There are some issues in trucking that trucking just can't address on its own. For many issues such as cargo theft, human trafficking, truck parking, law enforcement and a relationship with law enforcement can be invaluable in helping to address those kinds of problems. So today I'm talking with Mark Savage. He is the chair of the Law Enforcement Advisory Board of the American Trucking Associations. I'm Deborah Lockridge, and this is HDT Talks Trucking. Mark, welcome to HDT Talks Trucking.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
So I guess the first question is, what is the ATA Law Enforcement Advisory Board?
Yeah, that's a great question. The American Trucking Association several years ago decided that they needed to build a stronger relationship and partnership between the American Trucking Association and their members and law enforcement across the country. I think they looked closely at the state trucking associations and how all of the states pretty much had a strong relationship on a local level, and identified that there was a gap. There was some missed partnership opportunities rather at the federal level, and decided to build a bridge and fill those gaps. And so the Law Enforcement Advisory Board, or LEAB as we like to call it, because it's in DC, you got to have an acronym. Of course,
DC, we have to have acronyms.
It doesn't exist in DC if there's no acronym. So the LEAB, Law Enforcement Advisory Board, was created by the American Trucking Association about 4 years ago to really kind of improve communication and opportunities for partnering between the American Trucking Association and law enforcement across the country. It's got a rather large membership from folks all over the United States who are either involved in law enforcement now or have been involved in law enforcement, but also involved in commercial vehicle safety in some capacity.
So it's about 4 years ago. What are some things that the board has accomplished over those past few years?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Law Enforcement Advisory Board, when it was first started, we had a vision from Chris Spear, who does a phenomenal job kind of guiding the American Trucking Association and helping us, and helped us kind of give us an idea of what we could do other than, in our primary function, which is to increase communication. We decided that we would really kind of address 3 or 4 critical issues every year. And of course, as you would imagine, over the course of the last 4 years, some of those issues have continued on into multiple years. And some of them, I wouldn't say necessarily have been accomplished, but have become less of a priority than some other issues. We started off a couple of years ago when the truck parking became a significant issue, working with the U.S. Congress, mainly through the American Trucking Association. To be honest, we didn't directly communicate with members of Congress, but we were able to add context to the discussion about the need for truck parking from the law enforcement perspective. And our voice on the Hill through the American Trucking Association, and it was focused on safety, was, I think, helpful in getting some money for states to build and maintain truck parking facilities across the country.
So ATA was able to say, look, we've got this group of law enforcement, current and past law enforcement people, and this is what they're telling us.
That's exactly right. And what we said was, our officers out there on the road are encountering tired truck drivers who not able to find a place to rest. And as you know, and I'm sure our listeners know as well, these drivers are required to get rest after a certain time period. They can't just keep driving like I can in my personal vehicle. Not that I would want to, but I could. There's no law that prohibits it. These drivers have to maintain adequate rest. They cannot be fatigued. And if they can't find a place to get that rest, they can't do it. And so we had members of the Law Enforcement Advisory Board that shared stories about waking truck drivers up on the side of the road and saying, hey, you got to move on. And the driver saying, I can't find a place to sleep. And, what do? It's challenging. We don't want the driver sleeping on the side of the road because that in and of itself is not safe. But at
Right.
the same time, forcing a driver to drive to a safe location, if there isn't one or isn't space available, isn't safe either. So those were very compelling messages that the ATA used to make the road safer for our drivers. And it helped law enforcement as well because it's a challenge for us too. We didn't have an answer to that question.
And so what's been, I guess, the result of that? I had some success with that.
Yeah, so the Congress passed a couple of years ago, it's been about a year and a half now, a bill that increased funding through IIJA, increased funding for truck parking for truck drivers across the country. And I am seeing it at the state level now because that money gets, it gets given down to the state level, and state DOTs are using that money to build truck parking facilities and build technology that allows drivers to get real-time information about the availability of truck parking spaces along their route.
Yeah, that really helps instead of just trying to pull into this parking lot and that parking lot. It's like, nope, it's full. It's full. So that's a good issue. What are maybe a couple of other things that you guys have tackled?
Yeah, great. And I'd like to kind of add about quick story about one of our other issues in cargo theft and also talk a bit about human trafficking. But
Absolutely.
Cargo theft has been a major issue. I'll end with human trafficking because that's kind of one of the most significant, important ones. But cargo theft has been a huge issue, not mainly, but primarily along our southern border and in places like Florida, where we have ports. And what we were seeing was the trucking industry getting hit really hard by theft of cargo and in some cases pretty dangerous actions by criminals taking cargo from trucks, whether they be parked at a truck stop or at a facility or even at sometimes along the road. And what we found was law enforcement didn't really know what to do with, obviously if we have a hijacking of a load, that's pretty obvious, but some of these are quite nuanced and are very confusing for law enforcement officers, given the fact that they have a myriad of other duties. This sometimes resulted in hey, can you do a phone report? We can't send an officer out there. And what we did is we partnered with local agencies and federal agencies to not only increase awareness among local officers of the importance of this crime, of addressing this crime and taking a report, but also giving officers resources on what they can do, because a lot of these criminal actions are not just in one jurisdiction. Some are even transnational criminal networks that occur that transfer these goods across state lines, connecting those local officers with federal officers as well, so that a more comprehensive criminal investigation can begin. So, in other words, if an officer in Laredo, Texas, encounters a cargo theft, and that by the time they take the report, that cargo might be in Alabama, for example.
Right.
That might be something that the Department of Homeland Security or FBI would be interested in. And I know that some of those federal organizations in the last 2 years have stood up, not as a result of the Law Enforcement Advisory Board, but in support with the support of the Law Enforcement Advisory Board, have stood up cargo theft task forces in partnership with local agencies. The other thing, too, is about human trafficking. I'll just briefly state that we have worked with Truckers Against Trafficking and a couple other organizations to really increase awareness about this terrible crime and what not only truck drivers can do, but what law enforcement can do to address and mitigate this crime as it occurs across the country. This has been something that several of our members have worked closely on in multiple jurisdictions across the country, and then we're able to share some of their successes and failures with other members of the Law Enforcement Advisory Board and our members within the trucking industry, so they can be more aware of how we've been successful and where we have not been successful, and increase the partnership with Truckers Against Trafficking.
I know human trafficking is an important issue for a lot of folks in trucking. Obviously, transportation in general. Let's say when you're moving humans, traffic them, that they've got to be in some sort of transportation truck. So there's a lot of concern there. But what are some ways that the board has worked with or have advice for trucking companies about how they can work with law enforcement to work together on human trafficking issues?
Yeah, well, this advice isn't, unique to human trafficking, but it's particularly effective as it relates specifically to human trafficking, and that is developing a partnership with local law enforcement where your terminals, your distribution centers are. We have several safety directors who either have worked closely with law enforcement over the course of their careers or were law enforcement officers themselves in a former career. And those folks emphasize the importance of a local partnership with their police department where these distribution centers were located. And what we have found is not only where Truckers Against Trafficking and other anti-human trafficking organizations can come in and provide training about the awareness of what to look for, we have found that some of these safety directors have invited local law enforcement officers to attend that training, and there have been joint trainings between law enforcement and truck drivers at these distribution centers or terminals where not only can they learn together, but can develop a one-on-one relationship where if something were to occur in the future, they know who to call.
How does the board decide what those issues are it's going to work on?
The chair and the two vice chairs really kind of meet separately a little bit to talk about, all right, at a high level, what are some of the things that we ought to be addressing in collaboration with ATA leadership and staff. And then we share that information with the board, and the larger board in collaboration with the leadership of the Law Enforcement Advisory Board decides, hey, you know what, these are some of the things that we're seeing. These are some of the things that we ought to work on. And the board itself, the entire board itself, will end up making a decision as to which topics we'll address for the coming year. It's certainly a challenge given the fact that we only meet every other month and everybody's got real jobs. None of this is their full-time job. So it's hard to get folks focused on a couple of topics. And so we try and keep the areas of emphasis down to about 3 a year. Otherwise it's just too much.
Oh, yeah, there's so many issues that you could be working on. So have you decided for 2025 what you're focusing on this year?
No, we haven't. However, the Law Enforcement Advisory Board applications are open right now. In fact, they close tomorrow at the end of the business day tomorrow. And those applications, as a part of those applications, when one applies, they are asked, what do you think the Law Enforcement Advisory Board ought to be focusing on over the course of this next year? And that kickstarts the discussion for 2025. Once we are able to select our members and have our first meeting, which will occur next month, we will have that discussion with them based on some of the ideas that these applicants have submitted in the application process.
What would be your advice in all your years of experience? What can trucking companies do to build a better relationship with law enforcement? You mentioned that that's an important thing in things like human trafficking, cargo theft. What are some ways they can do that?
That's another really good question. I think I'll start off with a statement before I answer the question about the unique similarities and alignment between law enforcement and trucking. It's interesting. The careers are kind of the same, at least for a lot of folks. They're involved in transportation, whether they're driving goods across the country or driving a patrol district. I drove a patrol district for many years by myself in remote areas of the state of Colorado. And it's kind of a lonely task. It's also both careers are critically important to the success of this country, and from different perspectives, but both very, very important. And so I have always seen a tremendous alignment in law enforcement and trucking, and how the folks that are drawn to those careers are pretty darn similar themselves, actually. And so that's one thing that's always drawn me to the trucking industry is just a bunch of like-minded folks that want to do good for their country and work tremendously hard, a lot like law enforcement. And so I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for all folks, not just drivers, for folks that work in the trucking industry. That being said, I think that if you are a driver and you are driving across the country, pull into the port of entries or talk to the officers that you see and develop a relationship no matter where you go. If you are a safety director or somebody that is in executive leadership with a trucking company, I strongly encourage those folks to not only join their state trucking association, but the American Trucking Association, because both entities advocate for their members and advocate for drivers and companies as well. The State Trucking Association, which has been a fantastic partner with the Colorado State Patrol, and I know and across many other jurisdictions, has been a great partner for us. And we have accomplished a tremendous amount together, primarily focused on safety and improving our roads, not just for drivers of commercial motor vehicles or trucks, but also for drivers of the four-wheelers as well. Like I said, we have we've shared goals and alignment, and those shared goals and alignments are really focused on getting home safely. So what I would do is reach out to your local police department or at a weigh station and make sure you develop a relationship with those folks. And you can do that just by going into them, or you can go to the State Trucking Association. I think that's a fantastic opportunity, and the American Trucking Association as well.
Anything else that you'd like our viewers, listeners, trucking fleets, drivers to know when it comes to those relationships with law enforcement? I think, traditionally drivers especially have perhaps had a little not sometimes the best relationship with law enforcement. Just kind of, you've got experience on the enforcement side, you work with the trucking associations, and now with driveways. What are just some things you've learned and some advice you might have?
No, yeah. So I think the biggest thing I can give to both drivers and police officers is to have a better understanding of what the person you're encountering is faced with every day. So from a law enforcement perspective, understanding what drivers actually have to do and some of the challenges that they face in their daily routines, and how those challenges impact their ability to get their job done, interact with the public, and in some cases may even make them a bit cranky during the day. Just like anybody, we have challenges as the day goes on, and maybe we didn't have our cup of coffee in the morning and get a little cranky. The same thing would be for truck drivers, and that understanding, this guy doing your inspection may be a little bit cranky, but it may have nothing to do with you. It might be his computer isn't working correctly, or the last person they encountered had a really challenging day and took it out on the officer. I think if we all kind of took a step back and learned to really understand that, hey, you know what? Somebody might be just having a bad day, and try to understand where they're coming from, I think that would help a lot.
And that's probably good advice about any kind of interaction with people. You never know what things they're dealing with that you may not know about.
You never know.
All right, Mark, that's all the questions that I had. Anything else you want to add?
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about the Law Enforcement Advisory Board. It's a group of folks that I'm very proud of and what we're accomplishing, mainly through increasing communication and partnerships between law enforcement and the trucking industry. It's a really neat objective. And thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And for everybody else out there, please drive safe. Buckle up.
All right. Thanks, Mark. This is Deborah Lockridge with Heavy Duty Trucking. Again, I've been talking with Mark Savage, the chair of the Law Enforcement Advisory Board of the American Trucking Associations. get some great advice there on building those relationships, addressing trucking issues. If you want to read more, see more about these kinds of topics, make sure that you subscribe to Heavy Duty Trucking, Heavy Duty Trucking's e-newsletters on truckinginfo.com, and subscribe to HDT Talks Trucking on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform.